for so many women that say, there's no good guys, where do I find them? We need to reestablish hope that good, godly men do exist.
The boring guy in dating will actually be more fun in marriage than the guy that seems like a thrill right now.
When I look at your friend group, do I think those that are quality guys, that husbands of people that I would set my friends up with? Because if not, I'm like, that's a big red flag. Yeah.
It's not worth it.
It's not going to happen.
Hey, welcome to Dear Future Husband podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Because I was just saying, have we met in person? And then you're like, yeah, we did this Halloween party. And I'm just remembering my Halloween costume was It's Raining Men. Like, just like was very fitting to being single. And I had like an umbrella with like different faces of men. And that was my costume.
I remember Ryan Gosling, I think, was...
Yes,
yes,
he was definitely on there. Definitely made the cut.
No, is that actually opposite of how it feels in singleness, that it's not raining men and you're like searching to actually find a good one? Can we just dive into that right there? Because I know
For sure.
that's something people come on. They're like, how do you find not like a Christian husband? He doesn't have to be attractive. He doesn't have to be 6 foot. You know, people where there's none out there. What's your advice to people in that area right now?
You know, I first want to empathize that it can be a struggle, and I hear you. And I got married when I was 32, and at the time I was like one of the last single girls of my friends that got married, and I definitely understand. And even with that, I lived in big cities. I lived in New York City and LA, where there's tons of people. And even still, I was like, where are these awesome Christian men? You know, even living, I wasn't even in like a small town. And so I just want to empathize with the women who do feel that way first, before I, spew some advice, because it can feel hard and it can feel discouraging. But I will say that for me, what helped and transformed in my dating journey was I realized the more I focused on the lack, the more I saw lack. And the more I tried, the more I was like, there's no guys out there, the more that was your reality. That's what it was. Is like, I didn't see any good guys because I wasn't really looking for that. And I also had to challenge myself. Like you even said this, the people who are like, maybe he doesn't need to be attractive or 6 foot. Well, I still had a lot of things that I was holding tightly onto where I was like, oh no, but he's not my type. Oh, but he's not my type. And the type thing had nothing to do with his godliness or his character. It had everything to do with, I wouldn't really date a guy that loved football. Meanwhile, I'm LOL married to a guy who's obsessed with football now. But I think that's something where we're kind of like, oh, but I wouldn't date him. There's a lot of memes out there I see on Instagram that it's like, God, please send me my man. And then God's like, here's a great guy. And the girl's like, ew, no, but not him. And so I think there is something to that as well, where I heard a sermon where Tim Keller was saying that he was like, it's such a shame because so many singles will walk into an event and there'll be 20 guys of the opposite gender, and off the bat they're already eliminating 18, and they're only saying, hey, only these two would I ever even consider. And he's like, what a shame, because there could be some awesome people in those 18, but we're typically judging them off of physical appearance, or they might seem a little dorky, or this, that, and the other. So I think one element to this is just being more open. My whole thing since meeting JJ has been just date the unexpected. Like, you don't have to marry the guy that you go on a date with that you wouldn't normally go out with, but why don't you just challenge yourself to go out and see what happens? Because sometimes we're holding on to some silly things and why we're eliminating people that don't really matter. And sometimes if we allow God to really just do his work of the unexpected, which he loves to do, we realize, oh my gosh, like this person is actually way more my type than what my quote unquote type really is on paper. And because the type is based in character and consistency and love for Jesus and the way he treats you, and that cannot be substituted for just awesome chemistry. So I would say just even practically, you got get around people that have amazing godly partners that are men that you can just like reestablish that good godly men exist. Because I think for so many women that say there's no good guys, where do I find them? We need to reestablish hope that good godly men do exist. And I, in my singleness, decided, okay, I don't want to believe that there's no godly men out there for me. I want to start like just going around as many godly guys, even if they're married, as possible, to say, hey, this is possible. There's guys out here that do exist like this. And sure, this guy's not single, but I believe that God is an abundant God, and I'm going to trust that he has incredible things in store. And that men like this, these aren't just like 2 or 3 great godly men. There's not just 3 or 4 or 5 of them. Like there's way more. I just haven't met some of those guys yet.
Right.
So get around good godly men, and hopefully some of your friends have good godly husbands, you know?
Yeah.
But that really helped me.
You're great godly women, so they are married to godly men.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's part of the comparison trap that we see.
Yes.
We think, okay, if I am going to be around someone like that, then it feels like, well, they got it and I didn't. Or it has to be like, I don't know. There's comparison's just so rampant in so many areas that I think it is, well, you can understand because you are happily married, or I can't be around them because it's going to trigger this season and the uncomfortableness I feel. I hear that a lot of like a separation of the singles and the dating or married. And I'm like, no, I love, from a friendship factor alone, some of my single girlfriends that are younger or older than me are some of the most different conversations I have, the most fun interactions. And I'm like, I need that. Yeah. They need something from me. So I love that you're going there for so many reasons. But yeah, if you don't get anything else but that out of this conversation, was have friends that are in different seasons of you, glean from each other, use it as a testimony of, wow, my girlfriend found her guy out of the blue. I'm going to celebrate her and believe for it myself. Because my husband has 3 brothers. So that's a testament of, wow, there's 4 incredible godly men. But I wouldn't be married to either one of them. I love them. They're my brother-in-laws. But also knowing, okay, I can look and see, if I'm a single girl right now, there are great godly men out there. And still no, but there's a specific uniqueness that is for my relationship that God's called me to. And it may even, as Kait's saying, look different than what you're expecting. You were talking about something that I think is so, it's wise, but it's also hilarious. Saying, date the boring.
Yes.
Date the boring. Yeah, we're going to go into green flags and red flags later, but I'm like, this is just, I want to bring people in with this right now.
Date the boring guy. Well, I put this on an Instagram post and it did go viral, and it was so funny because most people understood what I was saying if you read the caption. Some people are like, oh, how can you say that about your husband? I'm like, no, I'm not saying he's boring. Trust me. Yeah, that is not what I'm saying. If you met JJ, he is not boring at all. But what I'm saying is that if you have a past of really chaotic or toxic relationships, which was my past, and I have such a history of just past being almost addicted to chaos, if I'm being honest. And that started from a chaotic household in childhood. And so when you learn that, your nervous system learns that chaos is normal, it doesn't know how safety, security, steadiness really feels. It craves that, but it's not used to that. And so so you're often still drawn to relationships where there's big highs and lows, and then big highs make up for the low lows, and there's just chaos and turmoil constantly. And it can become very, very toxic. And that's like kind of the definition of a lot of my past relationships. Mm-hmm. And so as through the years of working on myself and therapy, realizing that I had to retrain my nervous system. And part of that was realizing that the steady guy is going to appear, quote unquote, boring to my nervous system at first, because it's not going to be crazy highs and lows. It's going to be consistent. And that's going to, like, I'm not going to have to prove to him that he should like me. I'm not going to have to, like, be wondering why he's not messaging me back and, like, be freaking out. And it's not going to be so hot and cold and hot and cold. It's going to be consistent and steady. And that's great. And that's what my system should crave. But my nervous system for so long was not used to that. And so for some people, that are like me, you have to really work at, okay, this doesn't feel as exciting because it's not up and down and up and down, but this is stable and this is consistent. And this is for also the girl that might just be saying like, oh, he's just so nice. He's just such a nice guy, you know?
Yeah.
But the nice guy is probably who you want to end up with. Like, you want to end up with the good guy, the nice guy,
Yes.
steady guy, like, you know?
Get it out the friend zone.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I say date the boring guy, I'm like, date the guy that at first may feel to you like, oh, this is like not overly exciting because it's just, oh yeah, he's consistently reaching out. Like, I kind of know where he stands and I'm not guessing. And so your nervous system
is valuable.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for me, that was like, I had to fight for that because my nervous system was still very attracted to the highs and lows and almost proving energy towards guys. Like, let me show you why you should date me. And so with JJ, it wasn't that at all. Like, he was consistent and he was steady and he pursued me so well. And it was almost like, oh, he's just like, maybe he's too into me. Or maybe somehow that didn't feel great at first until I realized, no, this is what I want, you know? And so that's what I mean. Date the boring guy. If you have trauma in your past, or if you're really found yourself addicted to highs and lows or a pattern of toxic relationships, it might be time to date the guy that, you know, this is the nice guy. I'm going to try and date the nice and steady guy, or maybe he's slightly nerdy. Doesn't mean that you're completely unattracted to him. Doesn't mean he has no personality. It has nothing to do with having zero personality. That's not what I mean. I say boring in quotes. I mean that he's just consistent and steady.
Yeah, I'll go on a limb here and say I think the boring guy in dating will actually be more fun in marriage than the guy that seems like a thrill right now. Because if you marry the guy that's making you chase him and making you question, it might give you an adrenaline rush. What happens when you're married and he's not coming home and you're like, I'm not getting time with this person. I'm not growing with him. That's boring. But what's not is this person that's committed to you and shows up and like every day's an adventure. You learn about them as the years go on. You're like, I didn't know you were into this. Arden has a new hobby and I'm like, I didn't know, you know, we're 5 years married. It's like, I didn't know this was a thing. And it's so fun just look for something and learn and love your person for years to come. So yeah.
So good girl. Yes.
Boring guy now.
Quote unquote boring guy. Yes. Steady guy. The nice guy. Like,
yes.
Oh, and it's not just my story. It's happened for like multiple girlfriends of mine where now we all come together. We're like, yeah, date the nerdy or the boring guy. Like, absolutely. Like, we love our husbands, but they're so opposite of guys we've dated in our past in the best way possible. Right. And like one of my girlfriends, like she really was adamant to not date her husband. Like she was like, no, I'm not into him. He's nerdy. He's whatever. And she comes from a very wild, crazy past. She got radically saved. And so it was months of us as girlfriends too were like saying, hey, no, actually he's showing up so well and consistently. And you're kind of even half in and he's still showing up consistently into you and pursuing you. And this is actually really good. And she really pushed past that and got married, now is so attracted to him. They're best friends. Like I could never imagine her not being with him. But it really took her challenging her nervous system when she was usually into like the rocker guy, the bad boy, you know, like that kind of guy from her past. And so, yeah, that's just one story as well that I've seen it time and time again. And it's amazing.
Yeah. I feel like we very much dopamine date right now. Yes. Where it is like, I need that thrill. It's almost like a detox when you step away from that, where I realize how much soda and like high amounts of processed sugars and stuff I used to eat. And it took a while to think like, oh, healthy food is actually yummy. Now, if I were to drink a Pepsi right now, I would be bouncing off the walls and I'd have a terrible headache and highs and really low lows. And it's retraining your dating taste buds, if we could call it that.
That's so good, Christian. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's worth it. It's so worth it. No. Okay, I'm going to get back on track here, but I love that idea. But it goes into what we're talking about, overarching. How do we have not just like Christian healthy dating, but like universal? What are some good red flags and green flags? I think that's so neat. I love that you talk about that. So we can't just say, well, don't date this and don't do that. But like, okay, this is what we should be looking for. This is guidelines to aid your peace when you are dating someone you think is high quality and high caliber.
So good.
You just want to, I'm going to give you the mic. You already have a mic, but I'm going to give you the mic and let you share some of those, because I think it's so helpful to know the yeses and the nos.
Right. Well, something too that I'll just say, we define red flags as a point to stop and analyze more information versus it being an instant deal breaker. Because I think a deal breaker is like, hey, this is never going to work. And some red flags do become deal breakers. So the way JJ and I define red flags, which is different than some people out there, is like, hey, this is not great. Let's find out more information. And then if we find out that more information and we realize, then that's a deal breaker. Like this is done. But some red flags, I think also like it's valid to say, like you may see something that pops up, looks like a red flag, but don't make the judgment until you ask some questions and get curious, because sometimes we write people off without actually, knowing where that's coming from. Or maybe it's something they're truly working on. They're actively working in process to actually heal that specific thing, but it flared up in a bad moment. So I think that's just kind of, like I'm like, and like I've always said to JJ, like I had some red flags, but they were things that I was actively working through that, hey, catch me on a bad day, that thing might flare up because we're not perfect people. But if I was adamantly not fixing it or defensive about it, that would definitely have been a deal breaker. And JJ would be like, no. And vice versa, same thing. So some red flags to look out for. I think off the bat, talking about dating in the Christian world, I'm really adamant that you have to date a believer. And we, one of our best episodes from the last season we did on red flags was dating a new, lukewarm, or non-Christian. And I know John and Lisa's story is like a little bit crazy and like probably not the average story of people like coming to like get to know each other and get married, but
we'll have that on a future episode, guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just like knowing that story. But one red flag is you may have met them on a dating app, they may have put Christian, or maybe you got set up by them and somebody thought they were a great Christian, but like, what is their true walk with the Lord like? And even when it's coming to lukewarm Christian, like there's a lot of people that might say they're a Christian, but are they really following the Lord? Like, is there fruit in their life? And do they have a true relationship with the Lord? Christian personally, and I may sound legalist as saying this, but I don't think just going to church on a Sunday is enough. I think it needs to be more than that. And I think if that's where you are in your life and you have a deep relationship with the Lord, you're wanting somebody more than just a Sunday churchgoer. You want somebody who's potentially evolved in a small group, who's deeply connecting with the Lord outside of just Sundays. They're not just a Sunday Christian,
Right.
And that fruit takes some time to see. So on a first date, not just first date, but the first few dates, a red flag to me, if they don't talk about God at all, they're probably not talking to God. Okay. And so not that they have to tell you their whole life testimony or like all these things on the first date, but if they're not bringing up anything about their relationship with God, even in little moments, I'm kind of like,
where's this on your priority list?
Yeah. And so I take that so seriously because in my dating life, like I met guys through church. I met guys on dating apps. I met a lot of guys that said they were Christian, more than just a Sunday church or more than just a once a year Christian. But in the end, they ended up being more like just like the cool Christian. I'm just going to go to church because it's a cool thing to do, but I'm not really doing anything else. My friendships aren't deep and godly. Like I don't have a lot of godly men in my life. That's a big one for me. Are you a godly man? Do you have godly men in your life? Like, do you have, like, when I look at your friend group, do I think those that are quality guys, that husbands of people that I would set my friends up with, Because if not, I'm like, that's a big red flag.
Yeah, that'll be your husband's friends that are going to come to your house on the weekend.
Yes.
It's important. It's not just important.
Yeah, it's important. It's also the voices speaking into their life, and the influences they're around constantly. And so, yeah, I think godliness is one of those big ones for red flags that I look for, which you may not necessarily know on a first date, but it's important to assess and start asking questions because dating is an evaluation time. You're evaluating the person. Is this going to be a good spouse? and you want to evaluate well. And sometimes when you're like, well, how I was like, you're like getting so overwhelmed by the chemistry and connection. They're so cute and they like you and blah, 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 that you're like, oh, but they go to church. That's all I really need, right? That's cool. And you'll kind of like say, well, that's all right if he doesn't really have a devotional. And it's okay if his friends aren't that great of Christians. And it's okay if they drink a little too much. I mean, that's fine. Like, he goes to church, right? It's fine. Like, the Lord will convict him and change him. But no, I made way too many excuses in the past for guys. And I'm telling you, like, you don't want to marry the potential of what the person might become if they're not showing you any signs that they're even moving in a direction towards godliness. Like,
That's it.
you can't bank on that. So I would say that's like probably the biggest red flag. But there's so many others, man. So if you do want to listen to Heart of Dating podcast, we did a whole series on red flags. But 2 more red flags. I would say not a bad communicator or lazy. Like, lazy or bad communicator is a big one, because communication makes or breaks a relationship, and you can't just say, this is how I communicate. Sorry. Like, your partner is going to probably communicate differently than you, and you're going to have to learn the language they speak, and you're going to both have to probably make some adjustments there. So communication and laziness as well within that. And then, oh gosh, another top big red flag. Ugh. Now, this is different than deal breakers. Deal breakers for me is like an addict, abusive in any way, major issues with anger. Like, that's like, I won't even consider you. No. But a red flag is like, find out more information here. Another big one, gosh, would say they're just not growing in any capacity. And this to me is like, they're friends, but also mentors, and spiritually, how are they growing? Are they growing at all? Or are they just like kind of stagnant in their walk, and they're kind of just walking around with no sail in their ship? I think that's a really big one. You can't date somebody who's not willing to grow and be teachable, and who's actively pursuing that already in their life.
In my mind, I'm hearing all of the but in my head of like what we would say to ourselves in dating. And it's like, you have to get really firm on these when you are dating, because as you said, it's evaluation. You have to make excuses. You have to have grace when you're married. But what are you going to sign up for? And you think about growth, like if there's no cadence to their life, if there's no uphill, like you're signing up to partner with them, and you don't want to feel like you're dragging someone, because there's going to be times in your life where you need them to pull you, you need to pull them. I think that's huge. And that's one of the first things I saw on my date with Arden was,
So good.
Believe it or not, I thought he was so exciting because he was attractive, like he was passionate, but he was almost boring in the sense of what you were talking about, of like, it wasn't, I was questioning where he was, but he showed me so much of, this is where I want to go. This is the vision. And like, if you're going to sign up for that, like, let's go. I'm not going to waste my time. And for me, I was like, oh, you walk and talk what you think. There's no game to this. It's not just a picture. Like, you're about it. And I'm about that. But I'm about you.
There's like nothing more attractive than what you just said. When a man's like, here's where I'm going. Do you want to join? I'm like, you're telling me I don't have to lead everything, and you have like a vision for your life because I've just been this independent single woman. I'm like, this is so amazing. Like, that exists. Yes.
Stop manipulating me to like where you might be going. Like,
Yes.
that's
so good.
Green flag. Okay. Green flags.
Oh, for sure. Oh my gosh, green flags. I mean, we said some of them already, some of the opposites, like godly friendships. I can't emphasize it enough. Like, that is, I think, very underlooked. Well, I wanted to say this as a red flag because I think it's also, but opposite sex friends, and this is a little bit controversial, but not saying they can't have any, but like, how do they have more girlfriends as a guy than they do guy friends? And are they changing those relationships at all when they date you? And if you bring up something to them, how do they respond to that? Like, a green flag to me is like somebody who is like, I'm not going to mess with this. I'll give you an example. JJ knew my past. JJ is like, number one, wants to be such a trustworthy guy in that department that there was one time that he like paused on a girl's story, and I was just sitting next to him and I saw it, and I was like, oh, who's that girl? And he was like, oh, I went on a date with her actually one time. And I was like, oh, okay. And you could tell I didn't feel like great about it. Girl, he went and he unfollowed her, and I didn't ask. I didn't even say anything. But then he did a full sweep. He was like, you know what? I'm just going to sweep through all my followers. And this is not me making a big stink of it. Nothing. He was like, you know, there's nothing here that I want to hide or want you ever to feel uncomfortable about. So just like in our dating process, he was like, any girl that post something that even questionably is not great, I'm unfollowing. Any girl who's a tertiary acquaintance, I'm unfollowing, because there's really no point. Like, why am I even following this person, especially knowing your past, Kait, knowing how many times you've been cheated on and betrayed, which was a big part of my past. I didn't even have to ask him or present all these things. He was like, hey, I just never want it to be a question. And I've never had any uncomfortability with him, with his opposite sex friends, like any girls that he knows or follows on Instagram. Other guys, Christian, it was like they would put up such a fight. They would be like defending it to the ground. I would be like anxious and wondering. And a lot of times things would happen behind my back. JJ, not even one time have I ever questioned, which is such a testament to like a man with integrity, you know? And so I would just say, as a green flag, a man with integrity and who prioritizes the woman's safety in the relationship and making her feel emotionally safe above anything. Yes. Like, I think that's kind of what I'm leading to here is, if the man really wants to be with you and his heart is ignited to pursue you, he's also going to want to make you feel safe. And he's going to want to make this a place where you just can come to him and open up and not feel ashamed or scared. And he's not going to want you to question anything about his intentions or his integrity. And so those are like multiple green flags all in one on there. But
good.
I just think it's so important.
I saw a quote the other day and it said, be with a man that doesn't just want a wife, but wants to be a husband. And I think what you said right there is such a scope into what that looks like. Like, he wants to lead well. He wants to protect you. He wants to have integrity, and he wants to have the right friendships. He doesn't want the gray, oh, well, this is my friend, but like we kind of flirty and she gets my ego. And I feel like this is spat on a little bit of, well, I don't want to be with a weak man, or I don't want to feel like I have to control him. Like, we've had some instances like that where, if we had more time, I would go into it, but it is such an interesting topic, and I'm glad you're talking on it, because it can be a little taboo here and there. But I've seen the way Arden has handled those interesting dynamics actually create better friendships. One for me, the friend that he had that was the opposite sex, like, became my friend, not in a territorial way, but the way he navigated it led to me getting to know this person better and them having a continued friendship in a different dynamic. So it doesn't have to be, I'm controlling him or he can't talk to anyone, but it's like, what is the health radar on how they approach the opposite sex, people they've known forever or people that they come in contact with, where it's like, man, like you're saying, oh, this girl's posting stuff I shouldn't be seeing. I don't want that in my life or in our relationship. It's so key. Good job, JJ. I'm so
good job, Arden. Like, I'll do one more green flag if we have time for it. I almost forgot this, but boundaries, like setting and keeping boundaries and even knowing what they are in advance for themselves. Yes. Sometimes I've dated guys in the past where a boundary conversation is brought up and they're like, I don't know, what do you think? And you know, there's like nothing more unattractive to me than like, you don't have any idea, like you don't have anything, like what are your convictions, like so somebody who already knows their convictions and what their boundaries are and wants to set them and how to keep them. Like literally, I just can't tell you how many guys it's been like, I don't know, what do you think, what would make you feel good? I'm like, I have my own, but like, it's more attractive to know that you already have a conviction and that you want to lead in this boundary conversation. I think that's a big deal. And obviously we're talking physical boundaries, but of course there's emotional boundaries and spiritual boundaries and things like navigating that well, I mean, is another whole story, but I'm definitely referring to the physical boundaries conversation. And if a guy it's just the same. If the guy is not talking about God, he's probably not talking to God. Like if the guy is really loose on his boundaries, he probably isn't very good at keeping any boundaries and maybe doesn't really have that many like physical boundary convictions. And so I would definitely look at that and say, ooh, if he's not bringing this to the table at all and I'm leading that department, there's probably a problem.
Right. I think leadership is something where, as women, we have the ability to influence and to like have these conversations with our partner to really help the trajectory of where you go as a couple. But like, I talk about this, and maybe this is something that I'm unspoken about, but I think a guy should be able to lead. And he is not able to do that if the things I'm taking from what you're saying, if he doesn't know himself, if he hasn't actually ventured into what do I think, what are my values, my morals. And so you can't teach a man how to be a leader. So if he's not doing that, and he's not doing it from the beginning, he's not just going to magically start showing up as the husband you need.
Yeah.
You're how attractive or like cool he is. It's not working.
It's not going to happen. And that's where the too many ladies take on that role. And they're good at taking on that role, but at the end of the day, they don't really like it. They really want a man that they can respect who's leading in these areas. I know I am a leader and I can take over things, but in my core, in my heart, and how I believe I was wired, like I want to have that in the man. And it actually builds up so much of my respect even for him. When he's able to do that, when he steps up, I'm like, oh, wow, there's nothing more attractive. Like what you were saying earlier with Arden and his vision, you're like, wow, like, man, yeah, I can just sit back. That sounds great.
And I think you grow to resent. Unfortunately, women can resent their husbands if they don't have that ability. And so look for it now, because you don't want to get into an entanglement where you think, man, I can't even love this person that I said I vowed I would love because I was loose with what I was looking for in the beginning. I want to ask one hot question for you in the hot seat before we let you go. But there is a lady listening to this who's been dating someone for a long time or is even engaged, but she's seeing these red flags. And like you're saying, it's met with defensiveness, or there's so many of them, or they're habitual. Do you think she needs to separate from that guy?
Yes. And that's such a hard answer, because I know, especially if it's a very serious relationship or an engagement, especially an engagement, it's really hard to separate. I know somebody we mentored last year got engaged really quickly, and we didn't support the engagement, and we communicated that to her. But the Lord really, really guided her, and she ended that engagement. And it is so hard to do. But at the end of the day, there is so much more risk in marrying somebody just because you've invested so much, or just because there's a ring on your finger. You know, Gary Thomas says, do you want to be single would you rather be single for another 5 years and be 45 years happily married? Or would you rather get married now and be married for 50 years, but be completely happy or unhappy, excuse me? And there's nothing worse than being lonely and in a marriage and feeling so alone. Like there's such a difference between being single and alone and being married and feeling alone. And you really do not want to take that risk. And so I have actually a few friends that have broken off engagements, and it is painful and it is so hard. And they all say now, this is the best decision I've ever made to end that engagement. And so I would say, yes, pause and bring in some outside voices, counsel, not just everybody, but, you know, obviously talk to God and the Holy Spirit and really assess that for yourself, but bring in wiser counsel at this point. Like, this is not something to just sweep up under the carpet and say, oh, we've come so far, so why not just, we'll just do it. Every marriage is a risk, sure, but not if you're seeing this many red flags this far into a relationship. It is too risky. Your life and what you're doing for the Lord, and it will be so limited if you marry a person that's not really right for you. And so bring in some wise counsel and have honest discussions. Don't hold anything off the table is what I would recommend. Tell them everything. Hey, this is what's really been going on.
Yes.
And have them wise people and potentially a therapist as well, but have them really honestly, give them permission to honestly speak in and weigh that out with the Lord. It's really tough, but I think it has to be done before you commit to saying yes in marriage.
So good. Well, thank you for all that you shared, all the wisdom and inside stories that you gave us. And Kait, like we said, has her own podcast where her and her husband, JJ, they talk about the insides, the uncomfortableness of dating. And that is called, well, I'll let you say.
It's called The Heart of Dating. We're on Spotify and YouTube now. You can go to heartofdating.com and find all the things.